bring her in. Come on. Why can't I add you to the stage? There you are. Vanessa Beeley. There's that smile. How are you doing? You doing okay today?
Yeah, I'm doing fine, thank you. With all the craziness that's going on everywhere in the world, it's kind of difficult to keep up with it, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. And this show does its damnedest to do so.
Yeah.
Moving all around the
Yes,
world.
you do a very good job, but it's almost mind-boggling.
I do my best. Sometimes it's not enough. But thank you for joining me. And just for the audience to know, Vanessa Beeley, she is an investigative journalist. Investigative journalist. She's international investigative journalist. You can follow her work. By the way, I just want to make sure this is correct. Where can people find your work?
The best place is probably Substack, because that's Vanessa Beeley or Beeley Substack, I think. Because I just republish everything there. But I mean, I'm on YouTube, Telegram, X, heavily shadow banned and censored, of course.
Yeah, but you're still kicking. You're still doing the work.
Yeah, so. No, I'm still there.
Yeah.
Hanging on.
You sent me a troubling, I guess not necessarily an article, but we were talking about this yesterday, where you were talking about a cauldron that has been created around Hezbollah. And you even sent me the map for this. Let me see if I can show this map. All right, let me see if I can show this so the audience can see it for themselves, because they may say, what do you mean by cauldron in this case?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, and I'm going to let you break this down. Okay, here we are. Good. Damn it. All right, hold on. Let me try one more time.
It's not working. We can talk it through. I mean, it's...
we can talk it through, but I'm going to...
complicated, but it would be good at the end to be able, for people to be able to visualize it, because it is, even if I'm talking it through, it's very difficult for people to figure out the borders that I'm discussing.
I am going to show this map, hell or high water, but
I should have come with it on a piece of paper, and then we just...
No, you're perfectly fine. All right, so okay, all right, I got it.
Yeah.
All right,
so
I'm going to let you explain it as I show it.
Okay, fine.
But go ahead, break this down for us. When you say cauldron, what do you mean by cauldron, or what do you mean by Hezbollah around it?
Look, if you go back in history to whether it is the clean break doctrine that was, of course, penned effectively by the CIA, commissioned by Benjamin Netanyahu, who was then part of the Zionist government. This is the actual map of the new Middle East. Have you got the other one that shows all the new walls that are being put up around Syria?
Yes.
And then, of course, there were other versions of the clean break doctrine. There's the Yinon plan, the map of Greater Israel that everyone will be aware of. This is a map that was created by Colonel Ralph Peters, who basically rewrote the blood borders, as he called it. So he rewrote how the Middle East should look. So this is basically, and people might be looking at this going, but I don't understand. But effectively, the red barbed wire that you see there, apart from the one that traverses Syria to the south of Damascus, that hasn't yet been built, but in my opinion, it's in the process of being created. Those walls and those security fences are effectively already in place. So if you look at the northern border of Syria, the border with Turkey, which is 825 kilometers, more or less, Turkey has, in fact, built a separation wall across that entire border. When I was in Syria in 2018 and I was visiting the northeast after the liberation of various towns and cities there by the Syrian Arab Army, I could actually film the Turks building the annexation wall, or the apartheid wall, if you like, inside Syrian territory. So they've not only built the wall, they've effectively annexed Syrian territory as well. It's the third longest wall in the world after the Great Wall of China and the US-Mexico border wall. It's, I think, 3 meters high, 2 meters wide, 7-ton concrete blocks. It has a military patrol access area either side of the wall, which is patrolled by Turkish military, but EU-sponsored armored vehicles. It has seismic and acoustic scanners. It has jammers. It has drone detection facilities. It has gun towers and watchtowers, around 120 along the whole length. And then if we come to the eastern border of Syria, so if we go down alongside the northeastern border, which is with Iraq, which is around, around 600 kilometers, they've basically built already 400 kilometers worth of similar surveillance style wall, similar to what you'll see on the US-Mexico border. Then you come down to, so they're completing that wall. So that wall will effectively close in Syria from the eastern border with Iraq. But then you come down to the Jordan border, and this is where actually it gets kind of more interesting in a way. The Jordan border project began back in 2008. So it began under George W. Bush. It was picked up by Obama. Obama put in something like $500 million into the surveillance structure on the border with Syria, and also the drop-down border with Iraq, which you can see where Al-Tanif is written there. The border between Jordan and Iraq is also being basically turned into a surveillance border wall or fence. Now, allegedly, this began to prevent weapons of mass destruction exiting these countries. Of course, we don't need to get into the nonsense that weapons of mass destruction is, because that was the justification for the war against Iraq. But that was originally the justification for building particularly the Jordan security wall, right? Or fence. I would call the Jordan structure more of a fence. But again, it has something like surveillance detection, 5-mile radius either side of the fence. All of the surveillance from the Jordan side, by the way, is fed into the central CENTCOM, so into US command in Jordan itself. And so it under Obama, he poured in $500 million. Then it went into Biden. In 2024, Biden put in something like nearly 400 million, of which 150 million would go to Jordan for continued surveillance structure building between Syria and Jordan. This is all under the, the Homeland Security sector, by the way. So effectively, American taxpayers' money is going into building this surveillance structure on the borders between Jordan and Syria and Jordan and Iraq. But then if you look, so if you continue around the Jordan border, and you'll see there in Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah is centered very much in the south of Lebanon. And at the moment, you have Israel building security structures inside Lebanese territory. So you'll see at the south there, it's effectively being closed in. Immediately after the fall of Damascus in December, we're coming up to the 1 year, I don't want to call it anniversary, remembrance of the fall of Syria. Mm-hmm. Israel took over the smaller circle up the kind of southeastern side or border of Lebanon called Mount Hermon, which is the highest point in the region, very strategic point. And so effectively what's happening is that a wall is being built around southern Lebanon. This is also being contributed to by the UK, by the way, who for years now have been supplying watchtowers that they used in Northern Ireland. They're decommissioning them in Northern Ireland and bringing them to Lebanon, and they've been placing them alongside the Lebanese border with Syria. So that's why I've shown that it's pretty much enclosed through surveillance structure put in by the Zionist bloc, so by the Israelis, the US, and the British, to enclose Lebanon, but particularly to enclose southern Lebanon, because Israel, as I said, are erecting border walls inside Lebanese territory. There's multiple videos on X that you can see of this happening in different areas in the south. But also what these walls are doing, not only are they completely enclosing Syria effectively, which is now, of course, under the control of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of these atrocity-committing terrorist groups. But if you look where the only real opening is to the Mediterranean side, on the Syrian coast. But then, of course, right now, Israel is extending its reach hugely into Cyprus and effectively buying up property there. It's linking itself to the Greek Cypriot government. It's threatening Turkey to some degree in the north, although Turkey shouldn't really be there in the first place. But effectively, Israel is extending its reach. And of course, historically, Cyprus was a target for the state of Israel, and it was used largely as a sort of refugee shipping point to Palestine. So it's always been in the crosshairs of the Zionist entity anyway, of the Zionist movement. But if you also look, so there's a line beneath Damascus, which is going from Mount Hermon, which, as I said, is under the control of the Israelis. The Americans now are talking about bringing in military and surveillance equipment to the south of Damascus. And of course, there's the existing American unlawful base at Al Tanif on the triangle between Jordan and Iraq. So in my opinion, they're not necessarily going to build a wall or put a fence, but that's going to be the cross-off line where it becomes Israeli occupied territory. I mean, if we imagine Israel since December last year have effectively taken over, I think it's 800 square kilometers of Syrian territory. They're now around 40 to 20 kilometers from Damascus itself. They've built 19 new bases. They've got tanks moving freely around, particularly in the southwestern area close to the occupied Golan territory. So in my opinion, what we're kind of seeing, and it does relate to the clean break doctrine, which is all about breaking the Middle East down into manageable sectarian states that will be reliant upon Israeli protection. So in other words, Israel will have economic control of the Middle East, either directly or through its Gulf state proxies, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, that were effectively created by the British to enable the existence of the Zionist entity in the region. And of course, the placing of Israel in Palestine was designed to break up any potential pan-Arabism. At the time, you had the United Arab Republic, which of course was Egypt and Syria. And if you look at the placing of Israel, it was put directly to break down any kind of unity between Arab states. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Wow. Okay. And so what we're looking at here around Lebanon is effectively a chain of military bases and, let's say,
not bases. They're kind of, installations, watchtowers. So from the north around the eastern border with Syria, which at the moment is also under threat from Jolani's foreign Takfiri forces and ISIS forces, right? In the south, Israel is actually building solid apartheid walls, very similar to the ones that they're now increasing in the West Bank. I think there was a report yesterday that they're planning to build a new apartheid wall in Hebron, separating Palestinian communities again and preventing Palestinian farmers from reaching their land. So that'll be in Hebron, about 12 kilometers in from the border with the Jordan Valley. So effectively, walls are going up everywhere, which ties in with the idea of the new Middle East or of the new blood borders, the encircling of resistant states and resistant actors in the region. So if you look at Syria and how it's now being encircled by these security barriers, what it's also doing is preventing any access to Syria or to Lebanon from Iran and Iraq, and the other way around. So any resistance factions inside Syria, for example, can't go to the help of Iraq if anything kicks off in Iraq. Iraqi resistance factions can't reach either Lebanon, Jordan, or Syria because of the surveillance structures that have been put in place on the Jordan-Iraqi border. So this is all about encircling the resistant states and the resistance actors, and also, more importantly, isolating Iran.
Wow. What has been the response from these states? I mean, this is including Iraq. Obviously, Jelani has done everything in his power to make relationships with Israel in this case. But you would think that Lebanon, Iraq, these countries would take great issue with this. Even Turkey looks like they would take issue. I know Turkey built their own wall. But give us a breakdown of the players that are involved in their takes on this.
Yeah, I mean, you've also got to remember from the Iraqi perspective, even from the resistance perspective, the threat from Syria is of Jelani releasing the ISIS Takfiri elements into Iraq to attack the resistance there. So to some degree, it's useful to the Iraqi resistance to have a barrier to prevent that happening, right? From a Turkish perspective, it was always about annexing northern territory in Syria to act as a buffer zone against what they perceived to be the Kurdish terrorist threat, but also simply to annex Syrian territory to take control of the industrial capital of Aleppo, which was their goal even from 2012, the first city that was invaded in the eastern sectors and in the countryside were by the Al-Tawid brigades, which were Turkish-backed brigades that took control of all the industrial areas in Aleppo, stripped them bare, and took all the equipment and machinery into Turkey, which was then either sold off as scrap metal or it was reestablished as functioning factories and so on, industrial facilities in Turkey itself. And also, of course, Turkey initially was responsible for siphoning the oil out of northeast Syria through ISIS and then reselling it to Israel. So for Turkey, it's kind of a win-win. But also another interesting point for Turkey is we know that Turkey and Israel are to some degree, or were to some degree, allies in bringing about the fall of Syria. But since the fall of Syria, Turkey has been attempting to get deeper inside Syria and establish air defense and military installations on behalf of Jelani. But every time it attempts to get anywhere near the center of Syria, it's been bombed by Israel. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, Israel is not going to allow any regional military to remain that could potentially be a threat to Israel in the future. And that includes Egypt, it includes Jordan, it even includes the Gulf states eventually. That's why also the US is while it's making noises about sort of defense contracts with Saudi Arabia, you'll note that Trump is actually providing some equipment, but it's of a lower spec than what is being provided to Israel, right? Yes. But I think at some point, Turkey understands that it may be under threat. So in my opinion, this is just my analysis of it. I think they're also building the wall to protect themselves in the future, both from a potential backlash from the Takfiris that are not happy with Jelani's Western pivot or Israeli security agreements that at the moment appear to be on the rocks, but I think eventually are going to happen. Right. Israel is not going to withdraw. Israel never withdraws from territory that it's occupied, neither does the US. And it's very clear that Israel is going to take control of the South, not directly through its own settlement programs, but using the Druze, using local actors to try and maintain a foothold in the South to enable it to extend up the eastern corridor into the northeastern Kurdish held area of Syria and then extend into Iraq. So those are those two. For Jordan, Jordan is a vassal state of the British and the US. I mean, you know, Middle Eastern CENTCOM operations are run out of Jordan. So for Jordan, it's also of benefit to the extent that if there is any backlash from either resistance factions that are in existence still inside Syria, we'll come on to that, or from Takfiri or Muslim Brotherhood elements, because there are large numbers of Muslim Brotherhood factions also inside Jordan. So Jordan knows that there is a very high potential for internal destabilization if it doesn't play ball with Israel and the US and the UK, right? For Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah are not happy about it. But to a large degree, until a new escalation happens, they are adhering to the ceasefire. Yeah. But in the eastern border sections, which are effectively under the control of the Lebanese armed forces, we have to remember that the LAF is actually sponsored by the United States. Right. And so therefore, for them, it is to some degree also of benefit to have the watchtowers, because there is a genuine threat from ISIS elements on the border. So it's kind of mixed, if you know what I mean. But ultimately, it's not conducive to freely moving resistance actors or free peoples in any of these countries, or of the transfer of weapons and equipment and technology and advisors. Because with the fall of Syria, of course, the backbone of that land bridge was very much broken. But now what's happening is that we're seeing the physical and military encirclement of these countries, and economic encirclement also, because of course Lebanon is under huge economic pressure. All the countries are under economic. Yeah.
This is the second map that you gave, and you said unofficial. Colonel Brink, Peter.
What I wanted to show, because a lot of people always refer to the Greater Israel map or the Oda Yinon plan or the clean break doctrine, but actually they all kind of, and the Ralph Peters map, this was created in 2006. He's a former US military guy. He's still writing books about this. He's written a recent article about what happened on October the 7th, and he's very clearly pro-Israel, anti-resistance. And so here, what I wanted to show, because for me, none of these plans remain static. Like, all of them are going to be changing as the geopolitical situation changes in the region. But they give an indication of what is going to happen. So what is this? It's a redrawing of the borders that really were created by the British and the Europeans back in the early 20th century under Sykes-Picot, for example, which carved up the region already. But this is effectively carving up the region again. But again, if you look at Syria, and you've got the creation of a Kurdistan state, of course, the Kurds are being backed in Syria by the Pentagon until well into 2026. And then you've got Iraq territory, Syrian territory being carved into, Turkish territory being carved into, which will be anathema to Turkey and to Erdogan, to create this Kurdistan state, right? But then if you look at Iraq, what he was intending was to create a Sunni Iraq on the border with Syria. So again, it's another barrier to Iran and to the Iraqi Shia state, which he's suggesting should be on the border with Iran, but separated from Syria and Lebanon, and of course Palestine. We shouldn't forget that any break in the supply chain or the manufacturing chain is also going to impact heavily on Palestine and the Palestinian resistance. So the reason I wanted to show this is because I think what we're looking at is a reframing of the region, a remodeling of the region for the benefit of Israel. It's not necessarily going to follow any of these mappings, because they were all created, half a century ago, or no, but 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And so I think you're going to see a combination of all of those. But ultimately, a breaking down of the Middle East. Ideally, this is their strategy. I'm not saying that the resistance is not going to try and do everything they can to prevent it. And we saw something recently in southern Syria in a village or a town called Beit Jin, which is right in that area, the southwestern area, where Israel actually carried out a fairly major incursion against a group called Jama'a Islamiyah, which Israel claims has links to Hezbollah and has links to Hamas. They killed, I think, around 13 people in the incursion, but they lost a Humvee armored vehicle. They had to bomb it themselves from the air so as not to leave it behind. But what this suggests is that there are still resistance factions. Since that attack, they've been surveilling the area on a daily basis. Most of the civilians have had to leave because it's clearly a hot area now. But what it's very clear, or what it shows very clearly, there are still resistance factions, particularly in this southern region, that was always against both the annexation of the Golan territories and any incursion by Israel into Syrian territory. So this isn't, to a degree, the more that America and Israel clearly occupy the south of Syria, the more it leaves itself open to attack, both by Syrian resistance factions that will either emerge or are already in the area waiting for there to be kind of a movement against the Israeli incursions, right? So to a degree, it sounds weird. The further they go, the better it is for the resistance, because then it's clear that there is a threat. And this is Syrian territory. It's not Israeli territory. It's not American territory. This is Syrian territory. So therefore, it can be defended lawfully against an occupying force.
You made the point of saying Syria is being turned into Gaza. What do you mean? Explain that for us.
I think if you look at what we're seeing in Gaza, we know that Gaza is effectively a concentration camp and an extermination camp. And it's even more so now, because since the UN Security Council Resolution 2803 was passed, of course, with Russia and China's abstention, what have we seen? We've seen a dialing down of the actual hardcore genocide, but it's still ongoing because there's no humanitarian aid coming in, there's no food coming in. Israel now occupies 58% of Gazan territory. And by the way, it's the territory that is the most abundant from an agricultural perspective. So they've pushed 2 million Gazans from a landmass that was around 40 kilometers by 12 kilometers into a landmass that is on the coast, is desert, is obliterated, is pulverized by 2 years of Zionist bombing, and it's completely surrounded. They can't get out, right? So how I see what they're doing to Syria now, but on a much larger scale, is to create an environment where Syrians are actually corralled inside the territory. They can't easily leave a territory that is overrun by Takfiri elements. And by the way, Israel is creating the same environment inside Gaza because it's using terrorist proxies, ISIS-style proxies in Gaza to attack the Gazan people and to attack Hamas positions, right? And that's effectively what's happening inside Syria. So at that point, what information is coming out of Syria as regards the atrocities that are being committed? Very little, because mainstream media is not reporting on it. The same as in Gaza, right? I mean, Israel was not allowing journalists into Gaza, so they were reliant upon the Gazan stringers who were then being assassinated. What is it? More than 200, almost 300 journalists killed by Israel. But Syria effectively will be enclosed. Meanwhile, Jolani and the ISIS factions and Al-Qaeda, totally supported by the West, who've now lifted sanctions, taken them off the proscribed terrorist list, will be committing atrocities with very little reporting on those atrocities, because people in Syria are terrified. Even for me now, I've lost a number of sources, not because they've been killed, thank God, but because they've gone into hiding. And so, the information coming out is going to be extremely limited, both as regards the atrocities being committed by Jolani and the Takfiris, but also the atrocities or the land grab, resource grab by Western actors and other major powers, even like Russia, inside Syria, that we're not going to be aware of. I mean, the reason that Israel is trying to take the south is not only as a land grab, but it's also to get their hands on resources like the water resources, because the main Syrian water resources are in the south. The Golan, occupied Golan, already provides 30% of Israel's water supply. Wow. So Israel is looking not only for land, economic expansion, but also control of resources.
And just to be clear, the atrocities continue. I mean, they've been murdering people of various religious communities, stealing houses, those type of things. Can the people of Syria easily leave? I mean, especially with these barricades and everything else that are being put up and erected.
No. I mean, it's almost impossible. Yeah, it's almost impossible. I mean, even people trying to... There are smuggling routes, but they're extremely dangerous. And the Takfiris know where all the kind of smuggling crossings are. And at one point, when they were back in March, when they were massacring on industrial scale, the Alawites in the coastal areas, and they were trying to cross into northern Lebanon. In the end, they pretty much had to stop because the Takfiri forces had gone to those crossing points and were killing them as they were trying to reach them. But it's also neighboring countries are not that keen on Syrians coming in. Lebanon, perfect example. They already have, I don't know how many million refugees from Syria, of course, from during the regime change war from 2011. And so the restrictions on Syrians is also, and don't forget that the EU, which was perfectly happy to bring in Syrian refugees during the regime change war, but as soon as Damascus fell and Syrians were really at risk of ethnic cleansing and atrocities by the Al-Qaeda affiliates, stopped all Syrians coming to European countries completely.
Well, I remember there is this clip of a Syrian from Germany that agreed with the fall of Syria, effectively agreed with the overthrow. And the journalist was effectively asking him, saying, well, shouldn't you be ready to go back now? And he was like, what do you mean go back? And effectively the German government was evicting him. Yeah, he doesn't want to. It's like, so you agreed with this overthrow. You wanted Jolani in office, in power. And now that Jelani's in power,
you don't want to go back.
You don't want to go back. And he's like, oh, it's outrageous that they're forcing me to go back. It's like, how it's like, how is that? How does that work, right? One of the other things you pointed out was, and I saw this myself, but I didn't get the entire significance of it. The supreme leader gave a speech, and it was kind of out of the blue. Now, I've seen reporting that Israel is still looking for these kind of extended attacks on Iran, which seems suicidal, but I can't necessarily put it past them for doing so. I thought the first war was suicidal. What do you make of the supreme leader coming out giving a speech in this way?
I think you have to interpret that as being imminent threat. I mean, everyone in the region is kind of bracing themselves leading up to Christmas, because I think there was, I lose track of all the insane psychotic statements put out by Zionist officials and commentators on social media. But there was someone who put out some kind of, I think it might have been a post on X saying, we're going to be having Hanukkah in Lebanon, south of the Litani River this year. So, of course, that's what, the 14th or 15th of December, I think. And then there's been other chatter about after Netanyahu's visit to Trump, which I think is supposed to happen on or around Christmas or early New Year, that the war will escalate at that point. Speaking to people here, tensions are extremely high, not helped, of course, by the meeting between Nawaf Salam and the committee that is very much aligned with Israel and Washington and Saudi Arabia and the UK, the whole Zionist bloc, in
Right. That took place
Nakura,
today,
in
correct?
southern Lebanon. Yes, no, yesterday.
Yesterday. Okay.
Yeah. You know, and to some degree, a lot of people saw that as a first step towards normalization, because Lebanon has never directly negotiated with the Zionist entity. There were protests last night, and there's been mixed responses. Of course, Hezbollah's, I don't know if they've put out an official statement yet, but there were protests last night about the meeting. And it's perceived, of course, that Nawaf Salam is throwing the resistance and the people of the south under the bus. So, you know, Lebanese sovereignty also goes out of the window, because the point is, and I think it was President Assad in his speech at the Arab League summit, just as October the 7th had happened, when he said, look, if you try to compromise with Israel, what happens? It just bites your hand off, and then it bites your arm off. And I mean, he didn't say that. I'm paraphrasing what he said. But he said, basically, there's no compromise with Israel. And everybody in the resistance knows this, right? There's zero. Look at all the peace processes with Palestine from 1947 onwards. When has Israel ever honored any part of the deal, or when it's acted unlawfully as it did in 1967 and it annexed territories back then? It's never going to renege on those territories. It's never going to leave them. It's never going to leave the Golan territories, right?
Yeah.
And so, to a degree, tensions are high, and there is a risk of escalation. There's also the potential that it will maintain at this sort of high tension state until something happens where the resistance has no option but to react. So
Well,
we're kind of on a knife edge.
Well, apparently in the meeting, they made the point of saying, well, look, you need to pull out before we can disarm Hezbollah. The disarming of Hezbollah is not happening. I don't.
It's not going to happen.
Blow my mind.
It's not going to happen. You know, it's like the disarming of Hamas is never going to happen. I mean, yesterday in Rafah, there was an incredible operation by Hamas, who've been holed up underground for days because Israel wanted to kill them by blocking the tunnels, completely depriving them of oxygen or food, water, anything. And what happened? They exited from the tunnels and ambushed Zionist forces. And of course, then what does Israel do? It bombs Khan Yunis last night and bombs civilians. It doesn't bomb a military zone. It bombs civilians, of course, and kills women and children and starving civilians again. But this kind of heroism from the resistance it just doesn't go away, you know, and Hamas, and it's not about Hamas or Hezbollah, it's about the people as well in the south. I mean, how many interviews have we seen with elderly ladies, God bless them, in the south of Lebanon saying, I'm not going to allow Hezbollah to give away their weapons. I will take the weapons and use them against Israel.
Yeah, I would imagine they know. But what is the relationship currently between Hezbollah and the government of Lebanon at this point?
Tense, I would say. I mean, I do have to say that living here, Hezbollah is always the one that is trying to maintain sovereignty, trying to remain unified, trying not to put the country in a situation where the other communities and political factions are at risk. And so Hezbollah is forever walking this political tightrope because it's not a state actor, it's a non-state actor. So it has to act under the auspices of the state. And it always does so very responsibly, very often, of course, with the sacrifice of its own people in so doing. So, yeah, I mean, we don't know, but certainly preparations are being made for escalation and for aggression. And that, to me, is what was clear from the speech given by the Supreme Leader. And the fact that it was sort of, it wasn't spoken about beforehand. I think people only knew it was going to happen 30 minutes before he spoke. And so it was clearly a kind of a warning and giving instructions to people also to prepare.
Even people of
and Iran, they must be getting intelligence. Yeah.
And you're saying they may be getting intelligence, effectively saying that something is about to come about, something is about to spark off.
Yeah, I mean, they must be getting some degree of intelligence, and they must know what is happening regionally. You know, we had Pete Hegseth how many months ago? Oh, no, it wasn't even months, was it? 6 weeks ago? Basically telling the Iraqi defense minister, make sure that the resistance factions in Iraq don't respond when we start a war in the region, right? So the messaging has been out there for a long time now. But we've also seen reports of air defense being moved around Iran to points that were badly hit in the 12-day war, for example. So they're clearly, maneuvering and preparing for the next round.
What is the goal of this? I mean, it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, in the first 12-day war, or the 12-day war, not the first 12-day war, but in the 12-day war, Israel took the beating of its life. And yeah, they were able to kill a lot of people. But again, killing a lot of people is not necessarily the ultimate goal of war. Usually you have objectives. And it seems that the goal of it was this kind of decapitation strike to remove the leadership of Iran. That failed. And Israel burned through a lot of the resources, like human capital, that they were using, basically assets that were on the ground. In the process of that, Iran has expelled ungodly numbers of people out of the country, not to mention the executions of people who they found that were effectively working with Israel in pursuit of their objectives on this. So many of the assets that they effectively had at their disposal have been expended. So they took their shot. They failed at their shot. And they burned through a lot of assets in doing so, not to mention air defense that seemingly Iran went through like butter and destroyed many of those assets, which it's clear at this point that the United States doesn't have a huge amount to even give in the first place. So what is the objective of this? I mean, it seems like they're just running into a buzzsaw.
Yeah, and to some degree, I think the 12-day war was also a probing exercise by the US and by Israel to see, to a degree, what would happen. Of course, they took a beating. I'm not saying that they didn't. And the US prior to that took a beating, even from Yemen, if you remember, where the Pentagon was saying, no, please stop this war because we're going to run out of weapons to actually attack China. What are you doing? Stop.
It's like, if you need to attack Israel, that's fine. But leave us out of it. Yeah.
So, I think it's very difficult to tell. Will they try to assassinate the Supreme Leader? Yes, of course. This is their tactic. I mean, they've just assassinated a senior commander in Hezbollah in the last couple of weeks here in a bombing in the suburbs of southern Beirut in Dahieh, which also, again, included the targeting, of course, of civilians in a residential area, a busy residential area. I guess in the end, what they really want to do, and if you look at how they're remodeling the whole of the West Asia region and isolating Iran, They want to contain Iran. If they can't defeat Iran militarily, they would also ideally like regime change in Iran towards a regime that would pivot towards normalization with Israel and the West. To some degree, the reformist government in Iran is not necessarily the strongest reference resistance ideology. There is a degree of division in Iran, right?
Yeah.
But what happened during the 12-day wars is that you saw a huge unification of the Iranian people against an external threat. What they might try to do, and I'm not going to get onto the nuclear option because that's just too terrifying, but of course it exists and it's very rarely spoken about from a Zionist perspective. They have the Samson doctrine. If they feel that existentially the state of Israel is under threat, they have declared that they will use nuclear weapons, even against allies if it's necessary. So that is one high risk element in this. But another one, which I think they might try and go for initially, is to contain Iran and to create a situation in which the people turn against the state. Exactly what they did in Syria over 14 years, but particularly in the last 5 years when Trump brought in the economic sanctions that in the end did cripple Syria, reduce reliance upon a central government into kind of corrupt mafia cartels that were running the economy behind the scenes and benefiting from it. They may try to create that kind of scenario. I mean, I'm slightly suspicious about the kind of sudden drought in Iran. I'm not going to get into kind of geoenginering, but I do wonder if it's not
think, like the
somehow
heart,
being yeah.
the heart device
Yeah,
in the
because
United
this
States.
is a major, I don't know even if it's hot, but it just strikes me because the regime change war against Syria actually was kicked off with a drought in 2009 that, in my opinion, from what I've looked at on the ground, was created by Turkey, because Turkey has control of the water sources from Turkey into Syria and Iraq, and it can turn those dams off at any point and lower the level of the Euphrates, for example, which it has done on numerous occasions during the regime change war. And so, in my opinion, the drought in Syria, which led to the regime change war in 2011, was created by the alliance that wanted to overthrow the Syrian government. So there's a lot of things going on now that I think are all part of the war against Iran, right? And so I'm not necessarily expecting like a massive aggression, because we kind of know how that's going to end. I see it more as an intensification of a war of attrition, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
Basically, isolate Iran because you can't necessarily take them down militarily, and create these kind of Abraham Accords where you economically isolate Iran. I mean,
well, they've done this in South America. They've done this in Latin America. You've got the Isaac Accords. You've got Milei signing on to them. You've got Honduras now under the control of a Trump puppet. Venezuela is very much being isolated because it's another link in the resistance chain, right? And I think it was Backbeat Media that brought up the point that if Iran at some point closes down the Hormuz Straits, so that closes down the oil transit route, right, for the United States and for the whole region, then they need Venezuelan oil. So that's also why Venezuela is suddenly so important to the Trump administration.
Do you think Turkey and Israel at this point, considering that they are rubbing borders, are going to end up in some kind of major conflict?
I think it's extremely unlikely because Turkey is a NATO member state. And after Israel bombed the attempts by Turkey to encroach further onto Syrian territory, they had these negotiations and kind of a deconfliction agreement. However, of course, Turkey still, they still have an exchange of surveillance information and intelligence information. But at some point, Yes, I do think there is going to be a degree of confrontation between particularly Erdogan and Israel. I mean, you're seeing it in Cyprus to a
Yeah.
degree, because with Israel's encroachment or infiltration of Cyprus, of course, it does put at risk Turkey's occupation of the north. So, yeah, I do think, you know, between all of these so-called allies, you're going to see some degree of competing interests and how they manage it. But I don't think it's going to come to direct conflict between Turkey and Israel. I think that would be a bit crazy, because Turkey has a huge army, which has been, of course, supplied by the United States and the EU. And it's not a kind of, it's not like Egypt. It's a pretty well equipped, well trained army, as far as I know, from having seen them, you know, invade Syria on a number of occasions.
Vanessa, this has been a fantastic breakdown. Thank you for the maps. I am glad that we were able to show the audience so they can get an idea, like a visual idea of what is taking place. Yeah, everyone that I've talked to has this expectation that something is going to spark a larger conflict in the Middle East, and people have been on pins and needles about it. So thank you for this breakdown, honestly. Before I close, do you want to have any closing comments on this? Anything that we didn't hit? Anything that you want the audience to know before we close?
No, I think I've probably kind of confused people enough.
No, you get your breakdown was excellent. No, it's looking at the map, you can kind of get a sense of this idea of the cauldrons that are being created, and especially in this idea of the way that Syria is being carved. No, you did a great job. No, you did a great job.
Good.
Vanessa Beeley, international investigative journalist. You can find her on Twitter at Vanessa Beeley. You can read her Substack at vanessabeeley.substack. Definitely check her out. She gives these breakdowns. And as you point out, everything that you do ends up on your Substack. So thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
No, you're welcome, Jamal. Thanks for having me on again. Take care.
Absolutely. Be safe. Have a good one. All right. Shout out to Vanessa. Great